3 ways to have a communist meeting. So folks, when I talk about a communist meeting, I'm not talking about a business meeting or an internal meeting. If you're part of a leftist socialist organization, you obviously need to get together and as a group have an internal meeting about your finances, about your political line and things like that. That is something that needs to be determined by the membership of your group. You need to find a way to make sure it's democratic. People talk about Robert's Rules of Order and such. That's for internal meetings. I'm instead talking about educational meetings, events in which people are educated about Marxism and about socialism. And there are three ways to do it. Now, obviously, there are many different ways to do it. And what I'm saying here tonight is not, these are not laws. I'm not saying this is the only way anyone should ever do things. You should do things in the way that works out best. But based on my experience, based on, what I've lived and done, as well as what I've seen others do, as what I've heard about, what I've talked to people about, what I've read about in history, these are 3 ways to run Marxist or socialist or communist educational meetings. 3 different styles of doing events. And I'm going to start out with what they call a study meeting. Now, a study meeting, in my view, it shouldn't be recorded. All right, a study meeting would be a meeting where people get together and study a Marxist text or something. I don't think it should be recorded. It should be a smaller group. You need someone who's called a facilitator, that they will select the class material, and they will kind of lead the class, right? They'll figure out the location of the class. They'll figure out who to invite. They'll pick out the materials and make sure they have enough copies of it on hand. And that person will be the facilitator, and you'll convene the class. The group of people will get together. They'll all have a copy of the text that you're going to read, and the facilitator will open the study meeting by explaining why the text was selected, and why it's relevant. And that should be done. And I feel like the facilitator of the class shouldn't be too highfalutin about what the material is. It could be Capital, for example, by Karl Marx. It could be the writings of Lenin, but there's no need for it to be that, right? It could be a newspaper article. At one point, I was in a Marxist group, and I got a lot out of these study meetings I would go to, where we just read newspaper articles from the Marxist newspaper, right? There were other times, there was Marxist fiction, or revolutionary fiction texts that we would study. There were other times that we read right-wing material. As a group of Marxists, we got together and we read right-wing material, and we criticized it and talked about why it was wrong, right? So a study meeting, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be reading what is to be done. You don't have to be reading some really classical text. Read what you think the group wants to read. That's the main focus of a study meeting. You want to read a text that will get people talking and get people interested and get people engaging. With a study meeting, it's not a huge group. You don't want to have a study meeting with 100 people. You don't even really want to have a study meeting with 20 people. You want to have a study meeting, a study educational meeting with a smaller group. And the main purpose of a study educational meeting is to engage with a text. You have to find a text that people want to read. You have to read it in a group, right? Go around, different people read different sections and discuss it. And I don't think that study meetings should be recorded. On some circumstances, you might want to record them. For example, Dust James and David Fox, they did study meetings, just the 2 of them, over William Z. Foster's book, The History of the Three Internationals. And it was great. They recorded it. It's online. You can watch it. They go through the text together, and they talk about it. That's great. The reason, though, that I would recommend people not record study meetings is because you want to make sure that everyone is comfortable asking whatever question that they want to ask, right? Often, people will feel embarrassed if they don't know something, if they don't know what a phrase means, right? Especially if you're reading one of the older texts. Some of the terminology can be a little bit outdated. Like, in Lenin's classic writings, when he uses the phrase social democracy, he's just referring to the global Marxist movement. He's not referring to what we would now call social democrats. He's referring to Marxism, because there had not yet been the split in the Second International. So if you're reading a Lenin text and he keeps talking about social democracy, you might be confused by it. One thing that I've noticed is that there's a huge amount of bluffing in Marxist circles. The first time I was ever around Marxists, and they were all talking about the contradiction. Well, the contradictions of this, the contradictions of that. It took me years before I knew what they were talking about. They were talking about the concept that change comes through contradiction, through two things clashing, the Hegelian dialectics. And I have a feeling that most of the people I heard talking about the contradiction, also did not know what that phrase meant. They just heard other people in the Marxist circles talking that way, and they picked up on it, and so they started talking that way as well. You don't want to do that, right? You want to make sure that people feel comfortable asking questions. And if you record it and put it up on the internet, somebody might not feel comfortable with that. Somebody might, feel a little bit embarrassed. Somebody might feel like they should know it, or people might pretend they know things they don't know. In a small group setting, when you have a study meeting where you just have a text, something to read, the main goal is to find a text that will, interest the readers, that will, educate the readers, will get the people at the class interested. You're basically having a reading group, right? It's a book club meeting, basically. And you want to find a way that you can engage with a small group of people and have political discussions with them. And you want to negotiate the content. Honestly. You want the content of the class to be negotiated. If somebody says, hey, why don't we read this book? You should say yes, right? One of the biggest mistakes I made is at one point in New York City, I was leading a study meeting group, and there was somebody who recommended a text that was against the political line of the group I was in, and I wouldn't go along with it. And I look back on that, and I think that was a big mistake. They wanted to read a Maoist, third worldist text, and I should have just gone along with it. But I was under a lot of pressure from my organization. And that's one of the big problems with small, study session meetings, is that when you're in a very, very authoritarian vanguard party outfit, there can be a huge amount of pressure to control the discussion. To make sure that people aren't thinking things that are against the one true party line. And that leads to making really engaging with people impossible, probably one of the best study sessions I ever did, study meetings I ever did, was when I was living in Cleveland. Okay, writing it down. IMT. One of the best study meetings I ever had, I was in Cleveland, and I was in a political party that was devoting a lot of effort to these protests calling for the impeachment of George Bush. And I was basically saying I didn't agree with that. I thought they should be doing more to promote communism and Marxism. So they decided we needed to have a study meeting to read What Is to Be Done. And I remember at this study meeting, we read What Is to Be Done as a group. And we only got through the first 3 chapters. But I had never read What Is to Be Done. And if I had read it on my own, I wouldn't have gotten as much out of it. But the 5 of us got together. We had What Is to Be Done. And we sat there and went around in a group reading What Is to Be Done, Lenin's classic book. And I got a huge amount out of that. I had never been presented with the tactical question before. And, engaging with this small group of people in Cleveland as we read What Is to Be Done, I really learned a lot. Now, at the same time, though, what eventually happened was after 3 sessions of this study session, the vanguard authoritarian group I was in shut it down because they didn't like the idea that we were getting together and reading theory on our own. They wanted us to read something by the leader of the group. They didn't want us to be reading Lenin's What Is to Be Done. But I still learned a lot from it, and I really gained a lot from it. So, you want to negotiate the content, and you want to get people talking. And it's small groups. This is study meetings, right? You want to get a small group of people together. You want to have a facilitator who kind of introduces it, organizes it, explains why the text is necessary, and you want to go around and read it in a group and stop every so often to have a discussion, to just talk about what the text means. And people should be free to say, well, I think this is wrong, or I disagree with you. It should be a loose atmosphere where people can just kind of say what they want and they can really engage with each other, right? Study meetings are about discussion. It's about the interactions, right? It's not even really about the text itself. The text just kind of facilitates conversations to go with it. That's a study meeting. That is the first type of meeting where a small group of people get together. It can be in someone's home, it can be in an office, it could be in the park. You get together with a text of some type and you go around in a circle. You read the text to each other. One person reads, then another person reads, then another person reads, and you talk about what the text means. And, you want to have somebody who makes sure no one talks over anybody else, no one interrupts anybody else. You want to make sure that everyone feels comfortable asking questions. You want to make sure that everyone feels comfortable disagreeing. And that is the purpose of a study meeting. That is the first type of communist meeting you can hold. And it's very important to have those kind of meetings. The other two types of meetings are also very, very important. But study meetings are very important because they're small and they're intimate. At one point, one group I was working with, we were having study meetings, and they broke them up because they were too big. They decided they needed to be smaller, so they assigned groups of 10, and we got together and read the text together in groups of 10, and that made them much more intimate, and people could engage, and that was a good way of doing things. So that's the first type of meeting, a study meeting. The second type of meeting would be what you call a public meeting. Sometimes people call them forums, and those are very, very different than the first type of meeting, a study meeting. Public forums, public meetings, these are almost like shows. These are like performances, right? These are educational events in which a large group of people is gathered to hear some very, very informative speeches and learn all about what the group wants to learn. Right? You need a facilitator who will act as kind of the master of ceremonies, so to speak. They'll introduce the speakers. They'll call on people during the Q&A discussion. You'll need a facilitator. You'll need to have a keynote speaker, someone to give the main presentation, which should be 40 minutes to an hour. You'll need a keynote speaker who speaks for 40 minutes to an hour. You'll need to have what you call an activist report. You'll need somebody to speak about activism, right? And give an activist report. You'll need somebody to give a testimonial report. And you'll need someone who is a cultural performer, a musician, a dancer, a poet, someone like that. All of that is very, very important to the event. When you're staging a public meeting, you want to begin with the facilitator. And the facilitator will welcome everyone to the event. And the first speech should be an activist report. And the activist report should be somebody talking about some kind of activism that they did and how they applied socialism and Marxism to their experience, right? It could be, hey, we were registering people to vote in this area, and this is what happened, and there was a discussion. And I applied Marxism by talking to my comrade about this, or talking to the other person who was registering people to vote, or there was a disagreement about this, or we encountered somebody as we were registering to vote that said this. It could be we were at a protest the other day, and the protest went this way, and those of us who were in the organization, we pushed for this to happen, or did that. It could be, it doesn't even have to be, activism per se. It could be, like activism on the job. It could be a shop report. I was at work, right? And my coworkers and I were talking about how the boss was treating us. And you could have a shop report, right? It could be a university report on our campus. A lot of the students have confused ideas about the war in Iraq or something. And so, we have been engaging with the other students. We gave them some literature or something. You want to have a report. You want to open with an activist report, 10 to 15 minutes, with somebody just explaining how Marxism, socialism guided their activism, their life, their political activity. They need to somehow in their presentation show that this isn't abstract, that we're not armchair revolutionaries. We're not just sitting back and talking about theory, but showing how Marxism was applied in some way. And that's an activist report, right? It could be anything, right? But it's about how they applied Marxism and socialism in something that they did. That's how you want to open, with an activist report. Next, after the activist report, you're going to want to have a testimonial report. And a testimonial report is different than an activist report, right? An activist report is, we went here, we protested here, this is how we applied Marxism in this situation. A testimonial report is someone talking about how becoming a revolutionary, becoming a communist has changed their life, how it has improved their life, why it's worth joining the revolutionary organization, why they have benefited from it. And, it's 10, 15 minutes, maybe a little bit shorter than that, how long they've been in the group, why they decided to join the group. A testimonial report. That needs to be the second report. After that, you want to have some kind of cultural performance. And this is really, really, really important at a public meeting, public forum. You want to have a singer. You want to have a poet. You want to have a dancer. You want to have somebody who does something that's not a speech, right? Communists, sometimes they can have, this, every meeting you go to is speeches, and they all have this angry look on their face, and they're very serious, and everyone just sits there, and that can be really off-putting to a lot of people. It kind of reeks of this stillness, this authoritarianism, this woodenness, this dogmatism. You don't want it to be that way. So having somebody get up and play, one of the old, folk songs, or having a violinist get up and perform some classical music, having a hip-hop performer or a rapper get up and do a performance, having a dance team get up and do an interpretive dance or something that is a cultural performance. And it would be great, sure, if it has a political message, but it doesn't even have to have a political message. It just needs to give a cultural edge to the meeting. You can't just have the meeting be speech after speech after speech. If you're going to have a public meeting, it's entertainment. What you're doing is a show. You're putting on a show for people. So if you're going to do that, you need to have the show not just be speech after speech after speech. You need to have some music. You need to have some dancing, some poetry, some hip hop, some country music. I don't know, rock and roll, violin, something. You have to do something to just break. You've had your first two talks, right? You've had your activist report, 10 to 15 minutes. You've had your testimonial report, 10 to 15 minutes. You need to have a cultural performance to give people a break before they get to the keynote speaker. Very, very important. Then, your keynote speaker, they're the main presentation. They're the main event, right? They speak on what the topic of the event was, right? And the event could be about anything, right? But if you're going to have an event, you need to have a keynote speaker who holds the audience for 40 minutes to an hour and gives a keynote presentation. And the keynote speech at a public forum or a meeting, no matter what the topic is, they have to somehow find a way to relate it to current events. I don't care. You could be having a public event on what was the Paris Commune of 1871. Find a way to relate it to events that are taking place in our current time, right? If you're having an event about the differences between Stalin and Trotsky, find a way to tie it back to something that's going on in the current time. It's very important that the keynote speaker at a Marxist forum find a way to tie whatever they're speaking about back to what's happening in the present time, right? It's okay to do historical topics. It's okay to do theoretical and ideological topics. Most of the time, I would think that a public forum would be addressing a current issue or a current controversy. But in the case that it's not, you still have to find a way to relate it to what's actually going on. The other thing that's very important for a keynote speaker is whatever they're talking about, they can't just be reporting on it. They can't just be giving you data. They need to be providing analysis. Marxist-Leninist analysis. They need to be explaining not only what happened, but why things are happening. They have to be providing analysis, not simply information. That's also very, very important. They need to quote from different revolutionary leaders from the past, right? They need to quote Marx or Lenin or Che Guevara or Gaddafi or somebody, right? They need to quote. They need to have quotes to back up what they're saying. They need to draw from the knowledge and the history of the revolutionary movement, because if they don't do that, they're not really showing the audience how they're applying what they're learning. I mean, the whole point of a public forum is that this is a show, a performance, really convincing the audience of the relevance of Marxism and putting a Marxist or revolutionary perspective out there. So it's important that they tie in current events, even if you're talking about an obscure historical topic. You've got to tie it into current events. You got to give an analysis. You can't just say what happened, but you have to actually explain why it happened. You have to give an analysis. You have to quote from revolutionary leaders from the past. Furthermore, you have to present a way forward. It's not enough to just explain why things are happening. You have to then say what to do about it. You have to put forward a vision of how to move forward, right? It's not enough to just say, this is happening, people are getting poorer and the economy is getting worse, and that's because of capitalism. You have to then add on to it a way forward, right? You touch on whatever it is the topic of the meeting is. You have to somehow relate it to current events. From there, you have to give some kind of analysis. You have to quote from revolutionary leaders of the past, and then you have to present a way forward. Another important thing for the keynote speaker to do is to know the audience, right? Know the audience. I have repeatedly urged people to never assume that people know anything about Marxism, because they don't. The kind of things we talk about on these lives, people don't know about. So they should constantly be getting feedback from the audience, paying attention to what the audience is nodding in agreement with, right? And the audience has a responsibility when they hear a good point by the speaker to applaud, to say, right on, right? The audience has a responsibility to give the speaker feedback. A speech is never just the speaker. It is the speaker interacting with the audience, and it creates this beauty. If there's a moment where the speaker can reach like a climactic point and the audience can just applaud and stand on their feet, that's really powerful. That's the point of having a meeting. That's why you don't just have a Zoom call, right? And it's very, very important that the audience and the speaker have a back and forth relationship. That's very, very important. And it's important that the speaker know the audience and not talk over their heads. One of the worst political meetings I ever went to, it was very frustrating for me. I went to a political meeting one time, a communist meeting, and I worked really, really hard to bring 5 high school students to the meeting. I was in Union Square all day handing out leaflets, trying to get people to come to the meeting. 5 high school students who had never met a communist or a socialist before came to the meeting. And the speakers at the meeting, they did not explain things. Right? The first speech at the meeting was about Mumia Abu-Jamal and why they should free Mumia Abu-Jamal. There are rallies coming up. They never explained who Mumia Abu-Jamal was. So the 5 high school students that I had worked really, really hard, the 5 new people I brought to the meeting, had no idea what the first speech was about. Another speech was given about Cuba and how there was a very important demonstration coming up for Cuba. The speaker never said anything good about Cuba, never refuted any of the lies about Cuba, just assumed everyone in the audience was pro-Cuba and a communist already, and just gave information about when this upcoming rally was and why the Cubans really think it's important. Not good, right? Know your audience. If there's new people in the audience, you need to explain things in a way they can understand. If there's, if you're having an event, for example, many communists, most communists are in favor of a woman's right to an abortion. But if you're having an audience that's mainly Muslim folks, for example, who don't believe in abortion, think abortion is wrong, you might not want to hit that point too hard in your speech, right? You need to know your audience at a public forum, especially the keynote speaker, and that back and forth between the keynote speaker and the audience. And the audience, right, the members have a responsibility to support the keynote speaker, to applaud when he makes a good point, when he asks a question, how are things going in the country lately? The audience has to shout back, right? That the audience has a very, very important role. They're not just there to watch the speaker. They are active participants in the meeting. They are, right? The audience and the speaker have to play off each other, especially in that keynote speech. It's very, very important. Now, the Q&A at a public forum is also very important, right? Because it's a public forum. People are there to ask questions. And, non-members should get priority. People who are not communists, not members of a revolutionary organization, should be the first ones called on during the Q&A, because their questions are going to be the most important, right? They should be called on. Everyone should get a chance to speak before somebody speaks twice. That's very important, right? You want to call on people. You only want to answer questions after the Q&A is over, right? The keynote speaker can get up and give closing remarks, but you only want to do that. You don't want it to be a back and forth where they answer the question and then there's another question and then you answer the question. You can't do that. Can't do that, right? That leads to, an argument that goes on and on. What you want is the Q&A to go on, right? You may want to have a timekeeper and limit people's comments, right? So that, say that people who ask questions or make comments are limited to 3 to 5 minutes. That's very important to make sure that no one speaks over, and, because some people will get up and want to make a speech, and they can if they keep it to 3 to 5 minutes or however long, 3 minutes, however long you agree on. It might be important for the facilitator to keep time. The other thing that's important is, I think, the membership, right? The ones that are not giving a keynote speech or an activist report or a testimonial, they ought to, it's important that they get up and make comments as well and raise points that need to be raised. And that each, members should be prepared to give comments as well. It's kind of their responsibility to make comments. All of that's very, very important. That a public meeting is like a show. It's like a performance. And the goal of the public meeting is to communicate Marxist ideas, win people to Marxism, and build your organization. And a public forum is a great way to do that. The important thing about a public meeting is that when you have a public meeting like this with testimonial, reports, with activist reports, with a keynote speaker, with a Q&A then followed by closing remarks by a speaker, it's very important that it be recorded. In this day and age, especially nowadays, where you can, you just push the audio, voice record on your iPhone, it's really important that good dynamic presentations not be lost, right? Because there are so many people that are interested in socialism and Marxism. If you have a public meeting about Marxism, you need to put the video or the audio at least on the internet. Absolutely. It needs to go up on the internet because more people want to see it than just the ones who came, right? And you want to preserve that message. You want to preserve it. So a public meeting should be recorded, right? And if something happens or somebody says something you think later is not right, you can edit the video or edit the audio. That's okay. But it's very important that if you have a public meeting or a public forum, it's very important that it be recorded in this day and age. There's no reason that it shouldn't be online for the whole world to hear, because so few people are espousing these ideas. You want to preserve it. It's not like a study meeting where you want to not record it, so everyone's just comfortable to say whatever they want. With a public meeting that's staged, right, where you have cultural performances, you have audience back and forth. That kind of event you very, very much want to record and preserve it. Now, the final type of meeting I'm going to talk about is a street meeting. Now, a street meeting is different than a public forum. It's held outside. And instead of getting people to come to you, you're going to the people, right? If you're going to have a street meeting, you need to find a place where there's lots of people, lots of pedestrian traffic. And you want to have a street meeting. And instead of, people coming to you, you're going to them. Now, a street meeting, the purpose of a street meeting is to do outreach and meet people, and to communicate, the message of the Marxist group. Now, a street meeting is different than a demonstration, okay? And that's very, very important. What is a demonstration, right? Or a protest? Sometimes they call them demonstrations. Where does that term come from? That actually comes from the Napoleonic Wars, right? During the Napoleonic Wars, Napoleon's army, before the battle, they would march in perfect formation and demonstrate their strength, right? And a political demonstration is when there's some cause or some issue, and in order to demonstrate how much support a political cause or a political movement has, they manifest, they have a big group of people. In Spanish, they call demonstrations manifestations or manifestación, right? And the idea is you want to manifest, you want to show not only do these people agree with this, but they're willing to go out into the street. So a demonstration is around an issue. It's not about Marxism. It's not about building your political party. A demonstration is around an issue, and it's demonstrating popular support for a cause. A street meeting by a communist organization is not a demonstration. A demonstration is something completely different. At a street meeting, you want to get together and you want to have a decent number of people, but you can do it with only 3 people if need be. You can do it with only 3 people if need be. You can have an agitator. You need an agitator. You need a leafleter, and you need a contact person. But you could probably have way more than that. But the main thing is that all 3 of those roles are constantly in rotation, right? The agitator at a street meeting is somebody who's speaking and getting the attention of people passing by, right? They're standing on a soapbox. Maybe they have a bullhorn or a sound system, depending on the local city ordinances or whatnot. It depends on whether or not you can do that. But they're standing on a soapbox. They're standing on a stool. They're standing on a ladder. People used to always stand on ladders. And the agitator is speaking very loudly and trying to get people's attention. That's the agitator. And they shouldn't do it for more than 5 or 6 minutes, and then somebody else does it. It should be a constant rotation. But the agitators are getting up and giving short 5 to 6 minute speeches that are very loud to get people's attention. Meanwhile, you have other people that are leafleters. They have leaflets, with the information that the organization wants to communicate. And they're handing those leaflets out to everyone who goes by. People see the agitator agitating, and they say, what's that about? And then someone hands them a leaflet, and the leaflet communicates the message that the party or the revolutionary organization is trying to get out that day. So they get the leaflet, right? And the leafleters are constantly there. And you need a third person who is your contact person, that if somebody sees the agitator agitating, they take a leaflet. Comrades, keep your speeches 5 to 7 minutes, passionate and to the point. Exactly right, David Fox, right. And if somebody sees the agitational speeches, sees the agitator speaking, they walk over, they get a leaflet, and they say, this sounds really great, I want to get involved. Then the leaflet people need to push them over to the contact person. And the contact person is there to chat them up, find out who they are, get their phone number, get their email, and get them involved in the group and follow up with them, the idea is, right? And that because it takes a lot of energy to give a very loud speech, right? You don't want to do it for too long. You want to do it 5 to 7 minutes, very loud, and then the next person comes up and agitates, and maybe that other person goes to hand out leaflets, or maybe they're the contact person for a while. You need at least 3 people to have a street meeting, but you can do it with a lot more than that. And in fact, the more people you have for a street meeting, the better, because a lot of the people that you have at your street meeting, you want them to just be standing there and watching the agitator. Why? Because people are like sheep. And if they see a big crowd of people watching somebody speaking, they'll stop and watch as well, right? And so a lot of your people at your street meeting, they don't need to be handing out leaflets. They don't need to be the contact person. They don't need to be agitating. They just need to be looking at the person giving the speeches, right? They need to be looking at them and causing then other people to gather around. The ultimate goal of a street meeting, this rarely happens, but occasionally it does, is you want to get a big crowd of people to gather around and be listening to the agitators, right? For a long period of time. Probably one of the most successful street meetings I ever was part of was around the issue of North Korea. Right? When Barack Obama was threatening North Korea, there was an anti-North Korean movie that was in the theaters. So me and some comrades, we went to Union Square. We had big North Korean flags and pictures of Kim Il-sung. And we had a very, very effective street meeting in Union Square, hands off the DPRK. And it was very, very effective, and a lot of people were just stunned. Someone's supporting North Korea, someone's defending North Korea, and people gathered to listen to what we had to say. And person after person got up and gave an agitational speech. We handed out leaflets. We got people's contact information. A lot of people took our picture. We were all over social media. It was a big deal. It was a big deal. It was a great event. And that's called a street meeting. Now, one thing you probably want to do at a street meeting is, in addition to having your agitator and your leafleter and your contact person and people just standing there looking at the speaker, you want to have some kind of something visual to capture people's attention. For example, you want to have, at that particular street meeting I mentioned, we had North Korean flags. You want to have maybe red flags. You maybe want to have a big banner, for example. That could be a great thing to have, right? But something to catch the eye. In addition to the agitator, you want something to catch the eye. That street meetings are a great way to go to people. And like I said, you want to find a place where there's lots of people, right? In New York City, a great time to do it is near subway stops at rush hour, when everyone's rushing home from work. Great place, lots of people going by. The goal of a street meeting is to get as many leaflets out and to get as many people's names and contact information as quickly as possible. That's the goal of a street meeting. That's what you want to do at a street meeting, get as many people's information. And, another thing that's very important, no matter what kind of meeting you're having, whether you're having a study meeting or a public meeting or you're having a street meeting, it's very, very important that then you send a report to the rest of the membership of your organization. It's very important. And the reason for that is because you want to encourage other people in your organization to do what you have done. So it's very important that you say, hey, we had a study meeting at my house today. 5 people came over. We read this text, our conversation. Here's some interesting points from our conversation. Or you say, we had a public meeting, in Texas today, and 50 people came, and during the Q&A, this came up, and here's the link to the talk on YouTube. Very important that you do that. That if you have a street meeting, today we went out and had a street meeting, we got this many leaflets out, we got this much communication, here's what some of the people said as they were passing by. Very, very important that you report on it, because you want the rest of the organization to be encouraged by what you've done, number one. Number two, you want the rest of the organization to learn from what you've done. That's very important, right? You want the rest of the organization to hear about what you did and learn from it. Plus, you want there to be, collective input. Someone could make a suggestion. You could do it this way. You could do it that way. So it's very important, very, very, very important that you have, in addition to having your meetings, that you report on them to the rest of the membership. Very, very important. The rest of the membership should be aware of the meetings. They should be able to listen to the speeches from public meetings. They should be able to see photos and learn from other meetings. It's very, very important. Maybe it's not enough to simply do it. You have to let people know you did it. Now, essentially, the final thing I wanted to say is that ultimately, right, it's very difficult, right, to do this, right? And I used to do this kind of stuff all the time. I would organize street meetings. I would organize study sessions and reading sessions. I would organize public meetings. It's very difficult to do. But if you have a functioning organization that has a decent number of members, the goal should ultimately be that you have one of each every week, right? You should have a weekly public meeting. You should have at least one street meeting every week. And you should have at least one study session every week in your locality. That would be the goal, right? That if you're in a city or you're in an area, that you have one of each meeting every week. That would be the goal. Furthermore, it would be important that if individuals can go on vacation, that's fine, right? An individual, they're not able to help with meetings this week, that's fine. But it's important, it's very, very important that the organization continue functioning regularly. Even if you're just having very small study sessions, even if you're just having, even if your public meetings are not going to be big this week, you really want to make sure, that you continue to have regular public meetings, regular study sessions, and regular street meetings. It's very important that you continue to do that so that the group continues to maintain kind of a rhythm. Right? They don't just do it. Furthermore, one of the reasons it's very important to have meetings is because you want to create the image of a vibrant organization. You want to show that it's a lot of people and that they're engaging with these ideas and that the group is kind of a community. You want to give people a sense of community in doing the activism. It's not simply about understanding the ideas. It's about being part of a group. It's about feeling like you have a purpose, like you're accomplishing something, like you're on a mission. You know, all three meetings help do that, right? The study sessions help facilitate individual relationships, you know, raise people's awareness. The public meetings, you know, educate people, but also give them a sense of community. The street meetings are a way to go out and meet new people, meet the masses, confront them, get the message of the organization out there. All three types of meetings are very, very important. And those are the three types of communist educational meetings that you can have. You can have study meetings, study sessions. You can have public forums, public meetings, or you can have street meetings. All three of them are very, very important.